Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon or good morning, depends where you are. So today we're going to talk about thinking in bets and how we apply some of the principle to product development. So the cheapy subtitle is that I'm going to help you understand how to embrace uncertainty and to increase outcome achieved. While the first it's easy, increase outcome achievement is obviously like much harder. So I'm going to give you like my take on it and how you can do it, but I can't promise everything. So in terms of me, I am, I started like as an engineering function, and I've been working that function for about like 15, 17 years. Started my career as a consultant, and then I had a bit of a parenthesis with an entrepreneurship. I co-founded a company, and then last year I decided to move back to sort of like a more larger organization, and so I joined Babylon Health, where I work as an engineering manager. So to start this talk, I'm gonna start talking about like where my passion from something called Lean Startup come from. So that was back a long time ago. This is how old I am. I was consulting for a company, SecureSafe in Switzerland, and it was 2008. So, for the one of you, I don't know if there is someone from Switzerland, but, it's a great place to live. It's very precise, everything works correctly, the train are on time, classic stereotype, even when it's raining or it's snowing. And even from a process point of view, everything is great. So I was working for this incredible team. We were co-located. We had like a cross-functional team, UX and design. It was in this team with us, and we got everything we needed. The startup was in stealth mode, so it meant that it wasn't really interacting with customer really until they were going to go live. Planning to go live at the end of, I think end of June. We finally got live, and all this expectation about, like all these people that were supposed to sign up and join us, that fall off. At the same time, in 2008, there was a little guy in US that was writing a blog on Blogger on Lean Startup. And it was quite fascinating to sort of be in a startup and see it so far from what, Eric Ries was talking about. He was talking about like hypotheses and experiments. He was talking about like assumption testing. And instead, we were building basically a solution without really any assumption testing. We weren't really talking with our customer. For me, it was like a bit of a pivotal moment. I felt, even if you have a lot of money, because I'll tell you, SecureSafe had a lot of money, you can't crack it if you don't start to get feedback very early. And I think that was, this is why I probably got passionate about Lean Startup. And since then, I started to like get more in depth into the technique and, what it meant to run a product team using some of the tools that Lean Startup offer. Now, if we go forward quite a lot, so almost 10 years, this was I think that was the first company that I started working as a co-founder, Spot in 2017. In reality, neutrally, that was my first company I founded, was already live, but I started cooperating with Spotter in 2017. And the reason why I wanted to join them was because, they had a very interesting program. They were selling like a protein powder, something that I use quite a lot. And at the same time, they wanted to do it at a discount. So it was like, how do I find the best and cheaper protein powder? The team was quite like, it was quite unstructured. There were people in US, there were some people in Europe, and we were all working in different time zone and at different time. So there was a lot of asynchronous communication. At the same time, it was quite small. So imagine like this was like initial start of a startup, so 5-6 people. And that was very hard to make information visible. It was hard, for example, for engineer to know what design and UX was working on and what was next. At the same time, at time it felt that designer felt like engineer weren't really building what they were supposed to build. And at the same time, there was a bit of struggle from the management of the company to understand how do we prioritize really what's next? Yeah, how do we figure out what's next really too? And given that, I've been following Lean Startup for a long time, I started to say, it would be great if we can create like a problem and a solution team, and we can make them work together. And but the problem is that how do you make it work like a problem and solution team together? At the time, there was no really like, there was no framework for it. So what I started from, what was basically the board. I have probably in every one of you has a board that looks a bit like that. There is something that is ready and is at some point is going to be in progress, and at some point is going to be done. And obviously your definition of ready and done can be quite varied. And this is normally how we think about our work. Obviously, like what sometimes we forget is that to get to ready, things go through a similar process. There are things that, like at some point we decided that we want to do some analysis on some work that we need to do. And when it's done, normally that goes in the ready column for an engineering to pick it up. So that's another part of the flow. But at the same time, sometimes when we start thinking about the definition or, the solution that we want to implement, we want to dig deeper into the problem. So how do we know if the problem that we're solving is the right one? Do we know enough to be able to define a solution and so on? So this is when, you start thinking about the problem. And when investigating problems, normally you investigate with the research, user research or marketing research, these kind of tools. And so if I put this all sequentially, this is what it looked like. So when we talk about, if we want to have from problem to solution, I don't know, in 10 days, that's one of Babylon objective at the moment. This is what you really think about. You don't really think about from ready to done. You really think about the initial, evaluation. Okay, there is a problem to, this is the solution and we want to test it. Obviously, like, in the spirit of feedback, this doesn't really work like in sequentially. It works more incrementally. So these are all the arrows are feedback loop. At times you may get like you start working on the solution and you realize there is something that you don't know about the problem. So you work back and you review the problem and so on. And this tool, so making things so visible, it kind of helped because basically what we decided to do, we decided to have on a single board that had three simple sort of like items that was ready and in progress and done. We had all cards that could have been problem cards, solution cards, or cards that were about defining the solution. And these three types of cards, so the problem, solution, implementation card, obviously have a different way to consider done. So for example, a problem card, that when it's done when a solution card has been created. And similarly, a solution card is done when a spike or some implementation card are ready. And finally, implementation card, well, this we know this one. We are quite familiar with this one. So for implementation card means that probably this functionality is in production and we can collect some sort of feedback from the user. And what about, obviously, if you have three types of cards, the problem is that when do we pick one or the other? And obviously, so where we were often starting was like, okay, let's start from analyzing roughly the solution. So we assume we know the problem and we start writing about the solution. At times, we realize, well, actually, we don't know very well the problem. So at that point, if we didn't know very well the problem, we will create a problem card. And at the same time, there is times, probably rarely, where you already know what you want to build, you know all the scenario, you've done all the spikes, you have the design ready for some reason, and then you go for an implementation card. This is the rationale how you pick what card you work on. What happened? So we implement something like that. I did my little video, I presented to the whole team how to work. And, for the first few weeks, probably like we did iteration together. I was doing a bit more like as hand-holding, I suppose. What was happening? So the first thing that obviously I noticed was that everyone was more aware of what's going on. If you imagine you have a single board where you have things that the UX is doing and things that engineers are doing, everybody is more aware of what's going on. It's not like a board for UX and a board for for engineer, for example. And it also helped quite a bit in understanding basically the problem. So we used to, now that we had the problem card, more often we were wondering if we were working on the right problem, and we were connecting what we were implementing to the right problem. The gotcha was that, well, that kind of worked for a small team. And as soon as the team started to grow, we had to implement some sort of like limit on the work in progress, because if not, obviously the board will become too big. So that was my first attempt at handling something that was like a problem and solution team. When in 2019, I joined Gather, I tried to apply the same kind of the same process. You know, it looks like I had a problem team, I have a solution team. That sounds like a perfect match. It worked before. I don't see why it shouldn't work right now. I only had a bit of a challenge. So I started to struggle more and more in communicating the uncertainty around our decision making. I think part of the organization we're used to know that, you know, what we were doing wasn't like guaranteed to succeed. It was like, well, you know, and normally I used to say, well, we need to run an experiment. You know, we need to see if actually we need to run something quick and cheap to make sure that what we're building is actually hit the nail, is moving the metrics. But I think it was quite hard. And at the same time, what I was struggling now that I finally had a research team, it was that how do I know when I need to run further research? How do I find out? How do I even, you know, what's the research backlog look like? What does it fit it? And finally, now that we finally have like an independent team that is able to pick cards, how do I help them think about multiple solutions? Because obviously, if we're thinking about problems, we don't want to have only one solution at hand. We probably want more than one, and we want to sort of play with them and see which one is worth playing first. So I'm going to start talking about one of these problems, that is express uncertainty, because that certainly was what caught my attention and what drove me to think if there was a better way to communicate uncertainty when in product. At the time, that was 2019, I think the concept of bets was starting growing up, especially like in the product circle. You get like a lot of people start talking about like bets when they talk about experiment. That was quite interesting because it was like, well, that's, you know, probably are the same thing to a certain extent. They are similar as a concept. And so I found this book, Thinking in Bets. Duke is a next professional poker player. And I was listening to her interview with Sean Parrish on the Knowledge Project. It was an incredible interview. You know, I definitely recommend if you're interested in this space to watch the interview. And there were a couple of things that really like triggered me. And one was, I realized how, while I was talking about experiment all the time, I didn't realize that, you know, obviously experiment has a certain level of uncertainty. And so the way in which in thinking in bets, they think about uncertainty is that uncertainty means that your decision has a certain probability to succeed. And so this is what really got me interested. Also, there was a big discussion about resulting. Resulting is the concept of do not evaluate your decision based on the outcome. So basically, like, let's say you make a decision. The fact that, for example, you succeed, you're right, doesn't make that a good decision. You need to reflect on basically like at the time, given the information you had, if that was the right decision or not. Because potentially at times what can happen is basically, you know, your attempt failed, but that doesn't mean that your decision was wrong. It just means that at the time with that information, your decision was probably the right one. And so given that, we started like playing with just a simple thing. I stopped talking about experiments and I just started talking about bets. So, and obviously, as every good consultant will tell you, nothing can be better than a bit of a rebranding. So what I did, I took my process and I did some rebranding. So it became problem, bet definition, and bet execution. The bet execution basically was the implementation of the bet. Now let's look into what that looked like. So, you know, we talked before about problem card, what a problem is, because obviously I mentioned it briefly, but a problem can live at different level. It can be a business level problem. So for example, imagine an OKR that is increased revenue month by month, 10% in Q2. Or a product level, for example, figuring out if how the user uses certain functionality. Or a UX level, for example, understand, you know, if the user understands a certain functionality that you built. And so when you define like a problem card, obviously the first thing that you want to know is like, okay, what is it, my initial understanding of the problem? And you want to write down the questions. What question do you have? What do you really want to know about the problem better? And obviously, if you know already, like how do you investigate? And compared to my previous version of the process, where I would expect that the outcome of the card was to sort of like on your own define a bet definition, what I was advising them was that, well, problem cards are going to land in a planning meeting. And as a team, we're going to figure out what to do about this problem. So, And then obviously, like after a problem, what we will define, we will define like a number of definition cards. So obviously the first thing that you will define will be the outcome. So, and exactly what are we trying to do? What kind of things we're trying to improve? And our bet would be basically like how we think we're going to win it. So I don't know, let's assume we're saying, I would like to improve the conversion rate of this page 10%. And your bet is that if you make the button bigger, probably conversion is going to be 10%. And then the key part is confidence level. So what's your confidence actually this bet is going to pay off? How much, what is it? Is 50%? It's like, well, that means I don't know, or it's a bit more. And this happened as a discussion with the team. With the team, you're saying, okay, how much is it? Well, I think it's 60%. Why 60%? Well, we had a meeting with a customer and he mentioned this thing, so maybe we can use it. Someone say, well, I did some additional research and so on. But it could be also the opposite. It could be, someone could be very confident and then someone else in the team decided that, well, maybe that confidence is not appropriate. And then finally, like how much it's going to cost. So when we decided like how to approach how much it's going to cost, we thought about like the metaphor on at the fullest extent. So we say, okay, let's use some chips. I mean, poker chips, not potato chips. And so, when we would bet, we would say, oh man, how much we're happy to bet, because this is the cost of the implementation. If the functionality, it costs like, I don't know, a day is a £500 bet. If it's a week, it's a 3,000. And if it's more than a week, well, that's a lot of money to bet. So that gives us the idea also of how much we were happy to spend on our bet. And obviously, a key important stuff is to say, okay, how do I verify if we won? I mean, like, obviously, like, we're making this bet, we're investing all that, but how do we measure if succeeding or not? And obviously, like, compared to the bet execution card, this is quite similar. So it's very, as you've seen, everything is the same. The difference is basically the bet execution is a bit like an arrow. You prepare everything, you have all the scenario, you have everything ready, you did the estimates, and you're just ready to play the card. And basically, like, you then, on the other hand, you're waiting for some feedback and see if you won the bet or not. And in summary, what happened by using these kind of tools? Well, it certainly increased awareness of the uncertainty on the product team. I mean, like, especially if you come from a team that is used to sort of like getting a card and say, we're going to implement that. Understanding there is uncertainty is quite a big step, because normally this is missing. Not everybody is aware that, not everything that we're building is meant to succeed. At times, for example, you're doing a bet is not pay off, maybe you delete the functionality. But it's hard if you don't understand that actually inherently what we do is hard and there is uncertainty in the outcome. And it certainly increased engagement during discovery. I mean, planning meeting where we're discussing exactly, how we want to do that, how we want to solve the problem, definitely improved. I think the concept of like planning as a poker, like, or where you betting on something, you put some money on the table, I think it was also a bit fun. So potentially that would have helped. At the same time, the process was different. So the first few iterations, I remember, like, really had to do a lot of the process myself. People didn't feel comfortable betting on things or coming up with different options. It took like a couple of iterations, basically, where I was handled in quite a bit before it started to, come through as something that everybody was playing with. But then I also mentioned before that one of our goals obviously is to increase our options, because if we move into from, output to outcome, well, obviously what we want to do is to have as many options as possible to choose from. And so how did it work? How exactly a planning meeting works? Well, a planning meeting, as I mentioned before briefly, it works something like that. So we have a problem statement, or we have a problem card, and we start drafting a number of bet cards. So say, given this problem, I want to increase 10% conversion on this page. What can we do? We can, I don't know, we can increase the size of the button, we can change color. Okay, and then what we do? Well, we start discussing, how do we measure it? And obviously something we want to say is like, okay, how do we know conversion is going to improve? And then someone said, well, that's easy. We have Google Analytics, so that's going to be quite quick. And then we start discussing the most important stuff. What's our confidence level? So it's kind of like, for each of those options that we have on the table for this problem, what's that confidence? And we start one after the other. And also how much it's going to cost. So that's another important one. Now, it's a bit tricky to not sort of like to see one of those description without an example. So I thought we come with an example for what it looked like a planning session. So I don't know why I kind of picked like a dating website as a context. I've been married for a long time, so I'm not sure I know a lot about dating website. I have a friend in the audience that I know a lot, so I asked him a couple of questions. Let's say that the problem that we're trying to solve, we were trying to increase 30% conversion from sign up to the first date, okay? And so let's say we start from show matches. So let's say we show on a page where, given your profile, it shows you some matches, and 60% of people are going to send a request from that page. And of that, 50% of the one that send a request, they get a request accepted. And then of them, 70% book their first date. And what happened is that of that, likely 90% meet. It would be a shame if you book the first one and people don't show up. So what will happen in planning? So planning will work a bit like that. So we will start with things in black. Basically, like we define a first option that is, well, we start thinking, okay, an important part of the funnel is finding your best match. So we should improve the matching algorithm. Probably that will come from me. If I was on this kind of meeting, matching algorithm is very technology focused. So I would definitely say, well, I'm very confident it's going to change. It's like I'm putting like 60%. And then we discuss how much it's costing. And I say, well, to be honest, I didn't do a lot of investigation on new algorithm for matching. So I think at least it's going to take like 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, £20,000. £20,000 for a 60% confidence level is quite, it's quite high. So what can we do? Then the discussion starts. Well, for example, we could start interviewing customer who haven't found a match. Perhaps some of them may tell us, why, because Simone is concerned that actually people don't find a match because actually there are not enough people on the website. And then someone else come up with another option. It's like, well, we could remove accepting the request and allow to book the first date up front. And people were like, whoa, I mean, that's a bit crazy. Why someone would not have the ability to accept request? And well, and someone from research, Lisa from research said, well, to be honest, we have 50% of people that said they wouldn't mind to just go with someone that asked them out. I was like, okay, I'm not convinced. Okay, probably we have a bit of research, but not enough. So confidence level is 70%. What about how long it's going to take to implement it? Well, that would take £20,000 again. Okay, what can we do? Well, we can interview some customer. It's going to take 2 weeks. So it was like, okay, so 1 week, either 1 week to interview customers for the first or 2 weeks for the second. Is there something else? And then we come up with another option. It's like, well, we can keep the option to accept requests, be allowed to book in advance the first date. So instead of people to sort of like match first and then book a date, we could just basically say, well, I would like to meet you on, I don't know, on Monday the 2nd. Oh, that's interesting. That will help, because certainly that will cut on the request. How confident we are? Well, looking from the numbers, if you look back at the numbers, if you remove one step, obviously that, it's quite obvious that you're going to reduce quite a lot the conversion rate. And I say, okay, that's interesting. How long is that? Well, that's actually cheap, because actually it's, it's quite easy to remove this functionality. And this is how like a planning session would go. So probably what will happen at that stage would be that we pick the last one. The reason is because it's the cheapest with the highest confidence level. Going back a second, I wanted to say that this is not the only option you have. So for example, during a planning session, you may decide to, for example, to pick where your confidence level is high. Or for example, you can pick a cheap bet. If you have a bet that is £50, even if confidence level is low, there is no reason why to not bet it, because it's kind of like, well, if in half a day we can see the results, then it would be silly to not to try. And finally, at times, what we do, we play a card to increase confidence. In these cases, confidence normally is do some additional research or building something else that help us understand more the problem or the solution space. And so I said at the beginning that this is what's going to increase outcome achieved. So, I assume some of you are like, okay, what about your promise? So I think it's, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's hard to increase outcome achieved. There is no magic wand, but basically what you can do is you can increase your options. So the more options you have on the table, the more likely that you're gonna have one that you can play with. Also, you need to involve all the team in finding options for your problem. So it doesn't have to be, I don't know, the product manager and an engineer, or involve all the team. And actually make sure that you have plenty of diversity in the session. So don't just invite potential engineering. One of the best session we were having was when we had customer success in the team, because they didn't have like an engineering background. So what will happen, they will suggest like low technology solution. We will think about bets that were very complex, and they will say, can I just send this email to everyone? I don't know. And I was like, yeah, that's a brilliant idea. We can try that. And it's much cheaper to test. And also, my advice anyway, is that allow you to pick higher certainty bets or cheap bet first. So the goal of all this planning is basically at some point, you kind of need to figure out, what are the things that you're certain more, or what are the things that are really cheap, so it's worth to bet on. And finally, so obviously it is a bit selfish, but at Babylon, we are hiring for a lot of people in engineering, but especially in delivery, agile delivery. So if you're interested, please give me a shout, or give a shout to to Nabil that reach out to me. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Simone. That was fascinating. As the slide says, now is a great time for questions. So if anyone has a question, feel free to unmute and ask, or use the chat, or raise your hand in Zoom, all of the above. Haroon, go for it.
Hi there, Simone. Thank you for that. Really loved the presentation, by the way. And thank you for sharing that. And thanks to Bill for that as well. So the question that comes to my mind is, I'm working with like a number of different clients, and I'm sure everyone else as well, as a coach. How did you do the bet cards electronically? So given that most of us are working remotely, how does that kind of fit into like electronic tooling, for example, like Jira or Rally or whatever? I mean, is there a visualization of, for example, here's our top bets and here's a color coding for the bets, and the bets quantify as this? Is it like an electronic tool that you put your bet cards and the bet stats into? Because that'd be quite interesting if you do. So, if so, what do you use?
So this was Trello. So we were using Trello before. Then I found that basically like you can color code, you can have labels, and label have this funny thing that look like a poker chip. So we adopted them, but that was the only reason. I mean, I never tried with the coloring. Obviously, as far as you can label things, it's great. Obviously, I try a bit to make it fun, so there was like a bit of that element. But in general, I mean, this is the only thing I did. I created a template for each card. So this is like a problem template. This is like a definition template, so that people didn't have to remember from scratch. They would just clone the template and have everything ready. I hope that helps.
It does. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Anthony, you had a question in the chat. Would you like to unmute and ask? Otherwise, I can ask on your behalf.
Yeah, I can certainly unmute and ask. Apologies for the camera at the moment for tech issues. I was going to say, you help educate people that stuff isn't a sure thing and that you're actually making bets. But then if you talk about trying to achieve a 30% growth in XYZ revenue, well, what's that versus achieving 28% or 26%? So I was curious as to whether or not you use something like a Monte Carlo simulation to sample outcomes that teach us about our biases in regards to confidences.
So we use Monte Carlo, but normally for estimates. I never thought about using it for like educating people about bets or uncertainty. It seems like an interesting tool.
You said you're not doing much. Rainbow.
I think your little one, Simone, is trying to
Yeah.
talk to us.
That's not mine.
Oh, is that not yours?
No.
My
I
bad.
put Emma quiet in the room, so that's safe distance.
Anthony, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Are you happy?
No. The follow-up was yeah. So that extension was kind of where the brain went going. That was pretty good in terms of yes. So at what cost does it make it no longer worth it? But also, at what point are we making a bet that actually our assumptions might be a bit wrong? So that's probably where I went with that, and maybe that's like next lesson stuff for the product people you're working with.
Thank you. That's certainly gonna have a think about it.
Awesome. Sven, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, indeed. You mentioned, Simone, that when you introduced the concept of betting, you had some resistance against it. And I'm interested in and intrigued in the psychology behind it, right? Usually you would assume that if you create a gamification, like a bet system, that would allow people to relax a little bit more, and then they'll be easier to be engaged in putting their bets out, because it's just really betting and gambling, rather than having hardcore business priorities that are goals and KPIs driven and so on. Could you comment on your observation on the psychology of that resistance and how it changed?
So I think it's quite context based. So I think if your team is used to mostly work in an output based format, where I don't know, like for example, product owner come over and tell you exactly what the leadership team want you to build. I think the expectation is this is what your job is. So as a team, sometimes go feature factory. You kind of like you're building things that someone else is doing. So you are delegating to someone else to make the bet. You don't even know it's a bet potentially. So I think what I was perceiving is that there was almost a displacement of responsibility, and people were kind of like, well, doesn't mean that now is it's kind of like, what am I supposed to do? This is not something I've done before. So potentially what changed? It changed that we did a couple of iterations. Maybe there is also like when a system is new, you want someone else to play. It's a bit like, you play a new game. It's kind of like, okay, you play, I watch, and then I'll play with you. So it helped for me to make some, facilitating more. Basically what it meant that probably the first few iterations, I was coming up with probably 80% of the options on the table. And then it started to be something that people would look up for. So for example, they will look at what problem were on the board, because they knew that we were discussing in planning, so that they would have some idea ready. So people started to come out also with array already. This thing also create like, and when someone else starts, normally this is where it triggers everybody else. So if it's you, it's like, well, that's him. But then competition started to be there when basically someone else in the team joined.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Any other questions from anyone else in the audience?
Yeah, just one more.
Hi, Simone. Hi. Really appreciated, to be honest, to be able to be here, to listen to your presentation. Myself, just as I mentioned, my background is not really software development, but I was a product owner before, and worked with tech teams to develop solutions for the customers in a B2B market in fintech, basically. So yeah, I'm trying to get back to that, and I was just basically I was reliving my product owner days, where I was working with customers and trying to, and with the development team actually. I don't have a development background, to be honest, but to be able to work with developers and the business in the past to delight customers with the solutions. So I'm just trying to relearn my background, and it has been a massive help.
Thank you, Ash. So no specific question for Simone, is that correct?
I'm just trying to, like I had this, I'm a certified agile product owner. So I'm trying to relearn some of the lessons, and it's just been a massive help.
Awesome, great to hear it was a help. Anthony, you started talking just before, and then after, I think if you'd like to ask your question, and then we can go to Emmanuel, who just put her hand up.
No, I think it was asked and answered, so I'm pretty good. Thank you.
Cool, okay. Go for it, Emmanuel.
Hi, Simone, can you come back to the bet execution card? You are mentioning there that it's only created once you have done your spikes or design analysis and so on. So I was wondering, where do you have like another type of card that you create, like research or something like that?
Yeah, so we used to use the problem card mostly for research. So the idea is that, imagine like a planning where, you're saying, well, at this stage 2 is like, okay, we need that interview customer. Okay, that's for us is a problem. So it get written as a problem card. A problem card is anything that, has a question attached in a way, if that makes sense, and you want to find out more. And this is why we have different ways. Sometimes a problem card can be solved by code, for example. It's kind of like we need to add this to the to the website to figure out what's the better the problem, or we may have to do like, I don't know, like something else, like an experiment, for example, a completely different experiment to try to understand better the system. But in general, most of our UX research, even the marketing research, were done as a problem cards.
Okay, thanks for the answer.
Awesome. Anyone, any other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, guys, please join me in unmuting and giving a virtual round of applause to Simone. Thank you very much, good sir. It was an awesome presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.